Is there still opportunity on Main Street in the age of artificial intelligence, inflation, and Amazon? Well, today's guest thinks so, and he's putting his money where his thesis is. You're about to meet an unassuming boomer who's finding good success working with his millennial sons to invest in unassuming automotive repair shops. The crazy part? None of them have any automotive experience, but business and investing principles transcend niches. So listen in and discover what they're doing, why it works, and how you can apply their wisdom to your niche too. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Main Street Capitalist Show. I'm your host, Russell Gray. We are sitting here today with a good buddy of mine that I've known for a number of years, Mr. Bill Stowell. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Russ.
And so, Bill, I'm going to ask you to explain to everybody a little bit about what you're doing. But before you do that, I'll just talk a little bit of how we met. So for a couple of years ago, I was the co-host of the Real Estate Guys radio show for about 20 years. And I think Bill came out of that listening audience, came to our Secrets of Successful Syndication seminar, and it ended up joining our syndication mentoring club, which was awesome. And through the course of doing that, I discovered that Bill was very involved in acquiring Main Street businesses. And so, Bill, talk a little bit about where you're at in your business life right now. We'll talk about where you came from, how you got here. But I just want to get people to get a feel for who you are right now, what you're doing right now, and kind of how your business works.
Yeah, I think you're right. Initially my interest in the secrets of successful syndication was to do real estate out of our own area and with other people's money. And at that time, we were operating a couple of automotive repair shops. And I guess through that workshop, I became aware of the fact that you could syndicate more things than just real estate. And the fact that everybody else was focusing on real estate, we had something that was a little bit different. And, so we proceeded along those lines to get educated and try to do syndications. And at the same time, we got some exposure to people that were doing mergers and acquisitions. And so we kind of progressed into expanding our knowledge and our ability to understand the mechanics of mergers and acquisitions. And I think that's where we're at now. And, so we're in the process of doing a roll-up strategy, acquiring other automotive repair shops as time goes on here.
Well, let me tell everybody why I wanted to have you on the show and why I think this is so important. You're doing several things that I think are super interesting. Number one, you are investing in Main Street businesses. I happen to think that there is going to be a ton of opportunity on Main Street. 40+% of the businesses out there are owned by baby boomers that are entering their retirement years. These businesses are going to come available. A lot of them are being run by people that have not embraced the 21st century. So there's some meat on the bone, I would think, from operating efficiencies and so on, marketing and whatnot. So that I think is fascinating. Number two is you're raising Main Street capital to do that, or at least will be. I mean, right now you may not be actively raising, but that's in the cards as you continue to accumulate assets and create profits and make opportunities for capital, some of which will be your own and some of which will be your potential investors down the road. So we're not here to market any investments at all. That's not what this is about. And the third thing is you are passing this entrepreneurial gene on to your children. It's a family business because I've met your son, two sons actually, but the one son I know for sure is very active in the business. So for folks that are out there like, there's no opportunity out there on Main Street, and there's no jobs on Main Street, and the economy's broken, and robots are going to take over the world. You're in a niche where AI and robots probably aren't going to make what you do go away. And in fact, they're probably going to make what you do more efficient. So I would think if I'm out there, looking for a place to invest in a business, this would be a business that I would actually think would have some real opportunity. Cars aren't going anywhere, probably, at least in terms of needing to be repaired. So, Bill, just talk a little bit about right now, when you go approach someone about buying their business, what is that whole process like? How do you find these people? What motivates them to sell? And what are they most concerned about? What do they get stuck on? Like, what are they concerned about in selling? What makes them want to sell? Just what is that whole process like? If I'm out there trying to go buy a business, what type of things do I have to be prepared for when I talk to that business owner about divesting of the business that they've built?
Well, I think to your earlier commentary, there's just a lot of baby boomers that are looking to exit, and not very many of them have prepared very well, and some who have, things do fall apart at the end too. We've had a couple of instances where, the parents have hung on for the sake of the kids to take over the business, and it gets to that point, and lo and behold, they have no interest in running an automotive repair shop. So what do you do then? So I think we're working on our network. We have a number of brokers that we work with. We've got exposure through some consulting groups that we work with. So we're getting opportunities both through referrals as well as through brokers.
So when you sit down with someone and say, hey, I'm interested in buying your business, you're talking to someone who's already made the decision to sell, they've listed with a broker, or they are out testing the waters. You're not out there trying to buy businesses from people that really aren't looking to sell. Is that what I'm hearing?
For the most part, I think on the referral end of things, we do get in touch with people that maybe are thinking about selling but have not made that ultimate decision to sell. Whereas if we're dealing with a broker, obviously it's on the market for sale.
So let's talk about the business model. Are you flipping these businesses? Are you putting them into a portfolio and operating them as a bit of a conglomerate? Are you able to provide these businesses with some operating, management, technology, financial efficiencies? How does that business actually work after you've made the acquisition?
Yeah, I think back when we got into the mergers and acquisition mode, we hired a consultant to work with us to, he had a private equity background, which we weren't interested in the private equity aspect, but, he had the understanding of how a business that's going to go through mergers and acquisitions should be structured and how people view that type of business. And, one of the things that he did initially that was something that we probably would not have focused on is before we get into the mechanics is aligning our personal, our financial, and our business goals to make sure that we were all on the same page. And one thing that came out of that was, we want to make our money by buying and operating and not buying and package and selling. And, that's made a huge difference, a huge impact on sellers, potential sellers that we talk to, because there is so much private equity money out there after the same asset class that a lot of business owners appreciate somebody who wants to maintain their legacy, keep the name the same, keep the employees the same, not come in and clean house and change everything around. So, we're looking to, economies of scale, centralized accounting and things like that, and some better purchasing power, through the size of what we're doing.
I want to come back to what you talked about with private equity, because that's a real hot button for me, as you know. I do not like what happens to Main Street when private equity gets involved. And so just to be sure that everybody is on the same page and understands what we're talking about, when a Wall Street group raises money and they've got a crew that go in and look for businesses to buy, they look for businesses to buy that they can flip. And it usually goes through a two-step process. The first is the initial acquisition, where they buy the asset, they clean up the management, they get rid of all the inefficiencies, what they consider to be inefficiencies. They may rebrand it. They change a lot of things. It's very difficult on the employees, and some of that I understand is necessary because you've got to evolve. If you don't you don't grow, you don't die, and I understand that. But it is very tough, and sometimes they are able to do some of the things that a business owner wouldn't do because it's rough on the team, and these people have become their friends. So I totally get that. The other part of it, though, is when they get it to the point where they feel like they've got it really optimized, it's hitting on all 8 cylinders, to use a car metaphor, right? It's really running efficiently. Now they sell that second round. And in that second round, a lot of leverage gets used. So they load the company up with debt when it's operating at its peak, and it's got to perform at its peak perpetually, or the debt swallows it whole. And too often, that's exactly what happens because of the financial strategy. So people that bought the business, sold the business, flipped the business, made their merger and acquisition fees all walk away fat. Then the business drowns under the weight of the debt. The Main Street loses the amenity. The employees lose their job. It ends up just being terrible. So I'm not a fan of it. I'm a much bigger fan of Main Street investors owning Main Street assets and holding them for the long-term production of income. So sorry to take over there, but I just want to get on that soapbox for just a minute, because it's a big part of why I created Main Street Capitalists, is to make Main Street investors aware that people like you exist, and that there's opportunities to actually invest in Main Street amenities with people that care about Main Street, the employees, the brands, the customers, and aren't just doing it to maximize the fees and the profits and go down and to the next deal and do another deal. So when you're talking to a potential investor, a potential seller, you're telling me this matters to them. How much does that factor into maybe how you put the deal together? Do they stay in the deal? Do they carry back? Do they stay on to manage it during the transition? Do they have some carve outs for key employees? Anything like that? What kind of goes into this deal making when you're coming at it from kind of that Main Street heart focus?
Yeah, I think, and again, that is one thing that differentiates us from private equity, in that, we don't have a hard and fast playbook. We spend time with the owner, potential seller, to determine exactly what it is they're looking to get out of a sale. And, we're perfectly willing to customize and adjust, some of our criteria to make it beneficial for everybody that's involved. And I think, one of the overriding factors in our mission statement is that, yes, we want to run profitable businesses, but our primary objective as we're doing this is to enhance the lives of our employees, our customers, and the communities in which we do business. And that is just, it's a big factor to somebody selling the business that's worked 25, 30, 35 years in that type of environment. And it tends to mean a lot to a lot of sellers.
Well, I teach syndication, and I always say that when you raise other people's money, your loyalty always has to be to the capital. And sometimes people think that means that the employees, the team, the market, the customers don't matter. It's all about the bottom line. And so I don't want to be misconstrued when I say that, because I kind of come from the school that the only way you're going to have a successful return on capital, if you have happy customers, if you have happy employees, and if you actually have a good reputation in the marketplace. And so I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive. I think so often people who are only involved in the transaction at the point of transaction and aren't really invested in what happens after the transaction closes and what that business is going to look like in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, they have a different mentality. But you're basically a buy and hold investor. That's what I'm hearing. Is that correct?
Correct. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so when the capital comes in, right now it's your own capital and you're bringing in your own equity, and then you're pairing it with debt using SBA loans. You told me before we hit the record button. What kind of returns are these things generating? Is it primarily a cash on cash? Do you have an exit strategy? How long are you in the deal before you think about getting out? What does that whole strategy look like?
Well, I think our 12 to 18th month strategy is to continue to use SBA funding to do the next 2 or 3 or 4 acquisitions. We've got a lending limit with the SBA, and that'll be pretty much maxed out at that point. At that point, we'll have 8 or 9 operating shops and be in a position to go back and get some other funding, take the SBA out, and then continue to grow things.
Okay. So, I mean, we talk about this all the time in syndication training, and the idea of doing a reverse syndication. You take these stabilized assets that you've owned for a year or two, you really know them, you kind of know where the bodies are buried, you've worked out all the bugs. You raise capital and buy out that SBA loan, maybe even buy out some of your own equity, and then take those proceeds and move on and buy another deal, and then you stabilize it. And so that can be a better journey for the prospective investor. And I'm presuming that you're primarily going to be dealing only with accredited investors. Is that right?
I think probably, and again, going back to our strategy, at that point, we'll have 8 or 9 operating businesses that we've got a track record that that we are successful in being able to acquire other people's businesses and run them successfully.
So when you're out there and you take over these businesses, let's just kind of get a little bit into the war stories and the weeds, right? Because I used to watch Hotel Impossible with Anthony Mellicore, and he'd go in and see these mom and pop businesses, and there was drama and family issues and all kinds of weirdness going on. And of course, it was all dramatized for TV. I'm sure the TV show The Prophet, you saw a little bit of that. But you're living in the real world. You're not trying to sell reality TV. When you go out and take over these businesses, what's that whole experience like? What's it like for you? Do you get in there yourself? Do you have a team that does that? How do you actually execute on not just the acquisition, but actually stabilizing the asset, the business after the acquisition, building relationships with the people, and making sure that that thing is really working and gonna have some longevity?
Yeah, right now our criteria is pretty narrow. We're only interested in businesses that after initial consultation, at least have the appearance that they'll fit our culture and our way of doing business. We're looking for businesses that the team is going to stay intact, so that it's not going to require. We're going to have some during the transition, some involvement to be able to implement some of our systems and the way we want to do business. But by and large, after that, we're looking to, at this point, to acquire businesses that pretty much will run themselves. That the management team will stay in place. We just did a purchase where the owner's actually staying on for 6 months through the transition. So it's we talk about a hands-off investment at this point. We really haven't had too much to do. He had a good business before we bought it, and he's helping to improve our business. So
Wow.
I think as we grow, the organization, the management end of it gets a little bit bigger, then it will afford us the opportunity to get into some situations where maybe we have to put somebody in there for 9 or 12 months to get the thing running the way we want it to. But right now, we're pretty specific.
So, do you run a little bit like a VC? I kind of grew up in Silicon Valley, and my dad was active in the high tech community, and I went to a couple of VC meetings. I got a chance to meet some of those guys. I actually pitched a deal to one of them once, and I decided it wasn't the world for me. But one of the things that they do is they go in and they buy a business, and they work with the existing owner, the existing founder, the existing manager. If they can scale it, great. If for whatever reason it doesn't work out, they kind of have their management guys that bridge the gap until they can find a permanent solution. Do you guys have anything like that? I mean, when you have a business and you kind of a hit team that can go in if it turns out to be something that isn't working. Have you had to do that yet? Have you had any of that type of an experience?
Yeah, we had one situation which was pretty much just the opposite of the one that I just described. It had a management team that that wasn't a team that after we got in there and realized who we had and what the capabilities were, was not a team that we wanted to keep. But these are things all things that you learn as you go along. You learn things and get different takeaways from each opportunity that you get involved with, and that, quite frankly, has helped define what our focus is right now, to the point where we take a lot more time during due diligence to get an understanding of what the team is and isn't going to survive, once we take it over.
So how important are the people over, say, the brand, the operations, the facility, the marketplace?
The people are everything.
Yeah, I kind of figured that was going to be the answer,
Yeah.
but I wanted to double check it.
Yeah,
So,
no.
so how, I mean, what geographies do you start with a geography? You say, okay, these are the markets I want to be in, and then you dig down. Are you geographically focused? Are you geographically diverse? How do you decide where is a good place to make an acquisition?
Well, we've taken some incremental steps. Acquisitions 3 and 4 were 2 hour drive away from our home base. Acquisition 5 is a 6 hour drive from our home base. So basically, we're making sure that we can implement our strategy the way we want to, which is, ultimately we're looking to expand, probably to 20, 25 shops, and then, that'll be up and down the East Coast and the eastern half of the United States. But we're testing our plan. We're testing our ability to do this before we move too fast.
Let's talk a little bit about your background. Maybe somebody's looking at this thinking, oh, this is interesting. And again, I'm coming from the place where I'm encouraging people, if they have a degree of expertise in a particular industry, and that industry looks like it's got some resilience against some of the evolution of AI and robotics, it's going to be a kind of a Main Street, boring, essential business that probably going to be pretty stable as we go through whatever this technological revolution is going to be. I would put your business in that camp. And if someone says, hey, I want to get into that business, what professional background do you personally have? Where did you learn how to do this? Everything from understanding the financial part of putting the money together to buy the business, evaluating a business, going through that whole acquisition, but also really understanding how to operate these businesses, or at least, manage the operators effectively. And I know you're bringing your sons into the space too. So just to talk a little bit about that part of it, because I think that just because somebody can go raise money and buy an asset doesn't mean that money is going to be safe. So it is important that you know what you're doing. How did you get to be where you're at? How did you develop that skill set?
Well, interestingly enough, none of the three of us have any automotive background. So, our background is business. And quite frankly, I think that looking back over things, that's been an advantage to us, because we're not the technician that can stay there till 9 o'clock at night fixing the car because it's got to get out tomorrow. It's important on us to be able to hire the right people to do the jobs and get them done right. And I think as we talk to more sellers, that's a much bigger deal, because again, the majority of these guys are guys that are very smart at what they do, but they're technicians and they're mechanics and lack some business skills and are so busy turning the wheel in their business on a day-to-day basis that they're not able to be very forward thinking about where the industry is going and how they're going to get there.
So, that kind of reminds me of the whole Michael Gerber thing and working on your business and working in your business and not on your business. So if anybody hasn't read the E-Myth, if you're a younger entrepreneur out there, it's a business classic that I think everybody should read. I just came back from a trip back to Silicon Valley. Hadn't been there in 10 years. And I was telling the story by a home that I used to live in, which was right across from the street from what is now eBay's headquarters. I remember when eBay first started there, I watched it happen, and now they took over the entire campus. It was just a little industrial, not industrial, but it was a little office complex. And now they own the whole thing. It's all fenced, eBay signs everywhere. But in the corner across the street from them, there was a bicycle shop called Performance Bicycle. And I remember reading the story about Performance Bicycle, and it was a guy who decided that bicycling was a business that was going to be a good business to be in. He had zero experience in it, but he was a businessman. And what he did was he started a mail order shop to sell bicycle parts. And then when he could see that he had a certain amount of geographical traction, meaning that orders were coming in from a certain part of the world, he felt like it was safe to go open up a physical shop and that he would have a good chance of success. It was fascinating. And what I learned there is that having business skills and going into a business that you actually don't have any background in, it doesn't necessarily have to be a liability. In fact, it can be an asset. And that's what I think you just said. I experienced it myself when I got into the radio business way back in the day. When I became the host of the Real Estate Guys radio show and I took over running the business side of it, I had zero experience in radio or media at all. And I had to figure out how to turn that show into a business. And without any paradigm, I just kind of did what made sense. I looked around what other people were doing and figured it out. Now, we did have a guy that was doing some consulting with us in traditional radio, and I found out that, my thinking was actually a little outside the box, and that was to my advantage. Do you have anybody that is in the automotive business that is your mentor or coach or consulting? Or have you been learning from the businesses that you've been acquiring and then leveraging that knowledge through filtering it through your business experience and then sharing it and applying it to the new acquisitions as you go along? How have you approached that part of your development?
Well, it was about 15 years ago that I first subscribed to a training institute for automotives, and they've been invaluable. They have about 1,200 clients across the country. They know what everybody's doing, what things cost, where your KPIs should be, and basically we've been able to take that information, apply them to our businesses to get them to the level that they're at. And I think that also represents an opportunity that we see in acquisitions that probably private equity can't, in that, we've got 40 years of experience with these numbers, and, we know what makes up the numbers and can see behind them and see opportunities that, other people can't see.
So interesting. So I guess what I hear you saying, and it's actually good news to me if I'm hearing it correctly, is that not having any experience in a particular business isn't necessarily a limiting factor. It's just something that you have to deal with. And then you can plug into people that specialize in supporting people like you. And then you focus on what you do well, which is the business side of it. So if someone's out there thinking, hey, I'd like to figure out how to raise money and go purchase Main Street businesses, what I hear you saying is you don't have to have background in that particular business. And I would add to that myself is that it prevents the temptation of you, in this case, grabbing the wrenches and getting in there and solving a problem because you don't have the ability to do that.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so Bill, let's talk about working with family. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. You work with your sons, and how did that come about? How did you decide to do that? How did they decide to do that with you? I've had my kids work with me. I've had my kids leave me. I've had kids that have never really engaged with me. I've kind of had it all over the place. But how's that working for you? I think for fathers, a lot of fathers, it's kind of a dream that you get a chance to work with your kids. So it seems like every time I see you guys, you're getting along real well. You seem to be friends. But what is that like in the real world? How did it come about, and how's it going?
Well, I'm hoping they don't leave me because they're running things now. So I very dependent on them. But no, all in all, again, it kind of goes back to where I mean, Bill Jr. first came on board about 8 years ago now. Got laid off from his existing job. That there was never any pressure with either of them to be part of a family business or to work with me. And Bill Jr. kind of came along a little bit out of necessity initially, and took a liking to the asset class and what he was doing and learned more about it. And it has taken over the operations from there. And then as we acquired a couple of additional businesses, we needed some more support. My son Chris has got a finance background, worked for Citigroup for a while, and so we've taken him on as our CFO. So we kind of each have our own little niche, and so that's helpful as far as making things run smoothly. But there's always a few ups and downs, but it's a whole lot different when you get pushback from people when you know that their ultimate goal, we're all on the same page.
So what does your team look like? You've got the three of you, kind of roles and responsibilities. You mentioned Chris being the CFO, but why don't you talk a little bit about what each of you do, how you work together, who else is involved with you, and how you manage all that?
Yeah, right now, my role is almost exclusively with acquisitions. Bill runs the company as a CEO and is also director of operations, and is responsible for staying on top of where the industry is going and what we need to be doing and keeping our businesses profitable. And then Chris handles all of the finances and the spreadsheets and all the information that we need for our financing and funding and review of our financial information. You know, one thing is extremely important that we didn't always do that we do now is we review numbers on a monthly basis. You know, did we hit targets, and if not, why didn't we? You know, so we're dealing with problems in real time, not 12 months later once we do a tax return and find out, gee, we didn't make as much money as we thought we were going to make.
So let's talk a little bit about Bill Jr.'s role, because I mean that's really where the money, the rubber meets the road, so to speak, right? You go out and acquire a business. Okay, that's a transaction mostly, and then counting the money is interesting, but it doesn't make you any money. So it sounds like the bulk of the responsibility for producing the profits comes from Bill Jr. What does he do on a daily basis? How does he execute his job? And what is the accountability structure within your leadership or your executive unit?
His role, we have a general manager that oversees the operations. His role right now is to work with the general manager to make sure that the culture and our goals are implemented at each location. Reviews numbers with the general manager. He's actively involved with a couple of different consulting groups and industry trends, and we just recently hired an advertising firm to take that off of his plate as well. But he works with them as far as content that we're looking for on our website pages. And
is that content driven towards attracting investors, attracting sellers, or driving customers to the shops?
Right now, the focus has been on each individual shop. So it's intended towards driving customers to the shop.
That's good. That's where all the money gets made. Sometimes you sit up in the C-suite and you forget how the money actually gets made. That's good for you. Okay. So now when you get ready to start looking for investors, and you're not there yet, but how have you thought about, I mean, how these things are performing. Is it primarily a cash flow investment? Are you looking for people to commit capital for the long term? Because what capital always wants to know, investors always want to know, how do I get in, right? How much is it going to cost? What's the journey going to be like? What am I getting? Am I growing my equity? Am I getting cash flow? Am I getting tax breaks? Am I preserving my purchasing power? Do I get some asset protection or privacy? There's a lot of reasons why people pick different types of investments. And so for somebody who would invest in this type of a niche, what do they get out of it? What's that journey like? And then on the back end, how do they get their money back out? How do they get out? Have you mapped all that out yet? Or are you still working on it?
We're still kind of working on it, but I think at this point, I probably would look at each deal individually as far as the opportunity and how much money we need to raise, and the one thing that we have is we have a track record, and I think it's really a pretty much hands-off investment for an investor, and pretty much a guaranteed return on whatever we set that return up to be.
Are you talking cash on cash?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is a cash flow investment. Somebody's going to buy a stake in an operating business that I would argue is in a fairly resilient niche. And that cash flow, as long as there's cars that need attention, and then this is an opportunity to have some of that productivity, the fruit of that productivity flow from the Main Street providing of the service through the system into my checkbook mailbox money. So that's. Are there any tax breaks? I mean, because you're purchasing equipment and whatnot. Are you guys like with the Tommy's Car Wash? I just got done interviewing Dave Zook, and Dave he's got like 33 car washes, and a big part of that when he would put these car wash deals together, he's got these huge bonus depreciation tax breaks that pass through to the investors. The automotive industry, I would imagine, is pretty equipment intensive. There's probably a lot of depreciation. Have you guys experienced that yourselves when you go in and buy?
Yeah. There's there's a lot of equipment involved. We've got one site where we were involved with installing solar trackers for electricity that had substantial tax credits as well as tax benefits.
So people who are putting money in when you get ready to go there would potentially get some immediate tax breaks with the idea that they're investing for cash flow. And then somewhere down the road, you have to figure out a way to take them out. And you haven't quite figured that out yet. I hear that correctly?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. All right. So biggest challenges you face so far? When you look at the horizon, what are the things that keep you up at night? What has you concerned? When you are trying to look for risks so that you can mitigate, what risks do you see in the space you're in and the way you're doing things?
I don't know. I sleep pretty well at night, but no, I think just it used to be when you start out in business, whatever you learned was good for 20 years, and now it's good for 20 minutes. So I think it's important for us to stay on top of our game and just where the trends are and where the changes are going to be, and try to stay one step ahead. I think that's worked well for us, and that's certainly something that we bring to the table with acquisitions that we're looking at. It's there's just a lot of sellers out there that are just comfortable doing what they're doing, and they're getting tired, and there's a lot of opportunity in their shops that they realize it's there, but are just not interested in trying to take advantage of it.
Yeah, that's what I really feel like is a big opportunity with this. Just looking at the demographics, it's the same thing when you have somebody that's owned an apartment building, mom and pop or a self-storage or a mobile home park or whatever, and they've owned it for a period of time. They get kind of used to doing things a certain way. They haven't really been innovative. It's cash flowing. They got a comfortable life. They're getting ready to wind down, which is a reason why they want to sell. And they really don't have the gumption or the capital or the risk tolerance to go ahead and bring it up to top dollar. And so if you understand that psychology in the marketplace, you have the ability as an acquirer to go in and purchase an asset that has really a lot of meat left on the bone if you're able to come in. So I see that when I'm sitting in kind of vicariously looking at what you're doing, I see that being the biggest opportunity. So is there any other thing that you're looking at when you look at the space you're in? You're like, there's a lot of opportunity in this space. Where do you see the biggest opportunities?
I honestly see the biggest opportunity for us is being able to take our model and apply it to other asset classes. We've opted not to get into the auto body end of the auto repair business, but there's as much or more opportunity out there in auto body shops as there is in repair shops, and I think that's pretty much the way it is across all industries. There's just so many baby boomers that are looking to exit that, if you have a successful model and can apply it, there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense, right? You kind of master the model of acquiring a business and then running it through a team, and then just going into similar verticals. That makes a lot of sense. That's a great idea. Okay. Well, Bill, listen, it's been fascinating. Is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't? Something that you wanted to get across that we haven't discussed?
No, I think you did a pretty good job of covering things.
Well, I'm excited about what you're doing because you're checking a lot of boxes. You're Main Street investing in Main Street. You're making those opportunities eventually available to Main Street investors to own Main Street assets and enjoy getting a piece of that productivity. You're doing it with your family, which I think is really good. I think teaching the next generation entrepreneurism, not by talking about it, not by telling them they should look into it, but actually putting them under your wing and working with them on a daily basis to get it done. So I just love everything that you're doing. I thought people would really enjoy getting to know you. I can see on the video that you've got your QR code up there. So if anybody wants to track you down, they can do that. If they're listening on audio, what is the best way, Bill, for people to get in touch with you if they're interested in following you or learning more?
cell phone is 603-365-6480. And email address is SR as in senior at thecollinsbusinessgroup.com.
thecollinsbusinessgroup.com.
You
All
know,
right, ladies.
one thing I would add is,
Yeah.
on one of your calls the other night, there was a lot of talk about authenticity.
Yeah.
And I think in today's world with, who we are and the things that we're looking to do, I think authenticity and relationships is key.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, what Bill's talking about is I do various mentoring calls. This was, I think, our Sales Pro mentoring club call. And I've come to the belief that we are no longer in the attention economy. I think that you're definitely competing for attention, but there's so much garbage content out there with AI. Not that AI doesn't put out good ideas, but it lacks that human tone, that human connection. And so I think we're really in the age of authenticity. And I think people that lean into authenticity in their content creation and in their business practices and just try to be as human as possible, I think you're actually going to end up having a competitive edge. So I'd encourage you to do that. One of the reasons I love Bill is because he's one of the most authentic, personable people you'd ever want to meet. You could probably pick that up just listening to him talk. Bill, it's been a pleasure. It's always fun to catch up with you. I appreciate all the support over the years. You guys have been wonderful. Congratulations on your growth and your success. And thank you for sharing your pearls of wisdom. We'll have you back on the show. Keep me posted on your progress.
I'll do that, Russ. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's Bill Stowell. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of the Main Street Capitalist Show.